And if we could just make sure that for members the slides are broadcast up here. They've been passed out. Is this not working today? The monitors? Oh, all right. Okay. For members and for members of the general public, thank you so much for being here. We're going to start today's meeting with an informal presentation. It's not a committee presentation, but I know that many of you are here to comment on other items. So I thank you for your patience. I hope this is an interesting presentation. It's an important presentation that touches on issues. I know some of our members of the public are probably here to talk about student information issues, and I thank you for being here. I know other members talk about accountability, and I thank you for being here. And I ask your indulgence as we walk through just some other business, but it's relevant to some of the issues that many of you are going to be here talking about, and certainly for our teachers and our superintendents and others represented here, this is obviously important information. So I thank you so much for the indulgence. And board members, I thank you for taking the time to talk about it. We are trying to give the board and the public a kind of long-term indication of policy decisions that need to be made in the distant, say maybe intermediate term future. And I think it's important that we just articulate these things now so that you have a sense of the context for them now. So I'm going to walk through this presentation, and this presentation specifically does not relate to any decision you need to make today. It just is about a question and answer and a dialogue, and we thought doing it with the public in the room would be a better plan. So the topic of this, as you know from your packets, is an update on our gradual transition to higher standards for our students. And the basic premise of this is that if you have higher standards for students, then you're going to have to measure those higher standards. If you're going to have harder tests, therefore, you're going to have to adjust. What does that mean for our schools and for our teachers and for our principals? You know, what are the consequences of these things? We want to make sure that they're fair to our kids and our teachers, and that's what this is about. Okay, so let's talk about what are we actually talking about here. Over the last 15 years, we have used the LEAP and the iLEAP to measure the GLEs. This is well known, obviously, to everybody here. And we have seen really, really good progress. We're now taking on a second kind of mission, and that mission is going to be making sure that the LEAP that we use in the future is on a par with states across the country. In other words, that our kids should be able to do the same basic things as any kid should across the country. Writing essays, reading difficult readings, doing math, just basic things that kids should be able to be expected to do no matter what state they're from. And that's really the what of what we're talking about here today. That said, the how of how we achieve these standards is not something that any school or any parent or any student is going to be expected to do in the same way. That the how of making decisions about personnel, educators need to make those decisions for themselves. The how of lessons and curriculum, educators need to make those decisions for themselves. The how of where we send kids to school, parents need to make those decisions for themselves. And so everything that this board debate, I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of it is about the how. And you know, we believe that every school, every community, every home needs to do those things differently for themselves. So there's the what, which is a basic set of back to basics. This is what kids should be able to expect to do at a basic level. But the how is really different from place to place. So we wanted to provide you an update on a transition in the what. You know, we're saying that the basic stuff that a young man or young woman needs to be able to do at the most basic level, that is changing. And we've got a gradual change plan over the course of about a 5-year period we're in the middle of. In 2010, Bessie adopted new standards for reading, writing, and math. Doesn't get into what kids should read, doesn't get into what assignment kids should have or what school they should go to, but just basic This is what their essays should be able to do. This is what their algebra should be able to demonstrate. In 2012, the board adopted a new accountability system for schools and school districts that meets with those standards. This year, for the first time, we included a couple of questions on our tests that reflected a more ambitious back-to-basics sense of the what. So you saw some harder writing questions on this year's test. We didn't change the content, didn't change the curriculum. That's up to the local school boards. But we did make a couple of changes to the questions. Next year, every question on the test will be harder. And I think that's, we really want to make sure that that idea is clear to members of the public and to members of the board, that next year every question will be harder. It won't necessarily be different content. You know, we'll still ask questions about basic history and such, but what it will ask our kids to do in terms of how they're able to write, how they're able to read, it'll be a little bit harder. And then finally, as of 2015, the test will be asking kids to do the same level of rigor that states across the country are doing. So we're about halfway through what has been a gradual transition to these more rigorous expectations for our kids' reading, writing, and math. Ms. Bofi.
So I need some clarity on whether the test, so I see that the standards relate to reading, writing, and math. Does this change the science test and the social studies test that our students are given?
No.
Okay.
No. And I
so
will.
The questions will not be harder in social studies or science, aside from maybe their constructive response that'll be based on the new expectations in reading and writing.
Exactly.
Correct?
So
okay.
the writing will be a little bit more difficult, but the content will not be will not be different at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And I want to welcome everyone coming in the room. Just so you know, we are having a general discussion about the reading and writing and math that our kids are expected to do. So thank you all very much for being here. We wanted just to share then a couple of thoughts about, so as we transition to more difficult expectations for what our kids are able to do, what policies does that mean you're going to have to consider over the next 6 months to a year? And I want to itemize those. First of all, as this slide says, we believe that our recommendations will be to make sure there's always accountability, that the taxpayer invests billions of dollars a year in public education in our state. We have 1 million parents in our state. They expect accountability from us. We should demonstrate results. On the other hand, we should not rush this transition. We should have a patient and gradual transition. We've got a 5-year transition. We're in the middle of that right now. As this slide says, you will have to make decisions on 3 issues. 1, student accountability. If we have harder tests, not because of different content or different curriculum, that's a local decision, but because the tests themselves ask harder levels of reading, harder levels of writing, harder levels of math. Today, students pass through 4th grade, they pass through 8th grade, and they pass through 12th grade because they've done reasonably well on those tests. We need to ask ourselves, what should those policies change at all as the tests get harder? Second, the educators in our state, from me, our local superintendents, our principals, and our teachers, are all judged based on the progress that their kids make year to year. As we go through this transition, should we make any adjustments to that process so as to ensure that there's a fair transition for them too? Because remember, the tests are getting harder. We might want to sort of adjust the process by which they are assessed. And finally, our schools and our districts are held accountable too. Now, I would advocate that we've already made changes to adjust our school and district accountability policy, but we should always be open, obviously, to what any other changes that need to be made. But I wanted to call these out for you because you will be considering policy recommendations from the department over the next 6 to 12 months on these issues of promotion, graduation, educator evaluation, and potentially state, district, and school accountability, because we're transitioning to harder tests. Now, let me get a little bit more specific. 1, for student accountability. For both promotion and graduation, well, first of all, should we keep the tests as a measure of promotion and graduation? And second, what level on those tests should qualify you for promotion and graduation? Today, you have to essentially pass with a relatively low score the 4th and the 8th grade tests, as well as the high school tests to graduate. And there's a bunch of, kind of detailed policies there, but you basically have to pass tests to graduate and to be promoted. We will be asking the board to consider those policies as the tests get harder. Second, in high school tests, for example, when would those tests count? Let me just give you an example. Let's say you're in 11th grade in 2015. Should the 11th grade test count for your graduation, even though this is the first year that you've been taught on these harder tests and you're all the way in 11th grade? Second, for educator accountability. Educators today set goals based on student achievement. Some educators receive data as evidence of student progress based on standardized tests. How should we, if at all, adjust the goal-setting process or the data process in order that teachers have the fairest process and principals have the fairest process during a transition when the tests are harder? And third, around school and school district accountability, how will we incorporate these tests and make sure that this is fair as the tests get harder? Over the next 6 to 12 months, you will be receiving proposals from us on each of these issues. We'll want to maintain this dialogue in public, and we're going to do it in the following way, and just see it on the last slide. First of all, we'll be working with the relevant committee chairs on the BESI board through these issues, and that will be obviously both academic issues and educator effectiveness issues. Second, we have advisory groups that we'll be working with on this. The Superintendent Advisory Council, we've shared a similar presentation with a couple months ago. The Special Education Advisory Panel, we've begun to discuss some of these issues with. The Accountability Commission, which we're discussing later today, obviously will play a large role in this. And the College and Career Readiness Commission, in particular in connection with the high school pieces of this, will play a large role in this. So we'll be working this through over the next 6 to 12 months, every one of those committees. We have regular superintendent calls where we've begun discussing these issues with the superintendents and the charter school leaders. And we're doing a series of public meetings about these issues. Our diploma meetings is kind of a model of that. I would imagine that we'll have public meetings on other associated issues as well, including promotion. So members, we really just wanted to itemize these issues for you. We should be very upfront that these are difficult issues, and there's a lot of different concerned stakeholders. Promotion is a difficult issue. High school diploma is a difficult issue. Educator evaluation is a difficult issue. But I think that it's important that we get out ahead of this, that we continue the dialogue, just continue to talk about it in public, know that this is something that with all of our stakeholders we're having a conversation, and I appreciate you entertaining the discussion with us this morning. Thank you so much, and look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Superintendent. I want the board to know part of the reason this was here today is our attempt to start public discussion prior to final decisions being made. that while work is constantly going on behind the scenes on policies, we often feel as if, and others feel as if, what we end up getting presented is the final policy and not as much of the thought into that policy prior to the final vote. And working with the superintendent, this was one of the items that we wanted to bring to your attention, that we clearly see that over the next 6 to 12 months, these are going to be significant issues that we need to deal with. And I wanted, the superintendent volunteered, and I thought it was a good idea. He asked, could he present this to us in order for us to start having these discussions in our own communities, in our own districts, but start thinking about these policies as well. And they're important. And one of the global concepts within this framework that have been presented to us today, there's really two. One, can we, as a Bessie board, change how we do our business, be more thoughtful, be in front of issues rather than behind issues? I think we're doing that. And number two, the concept of how do we give more autonomy to decision makers, to local districts, to parents, to students. How do we create an autonomous system, a free system, but maintain high standards? And these issues will be embedded within this discussion. So that's kind of the background of why we're having this discussion today, and I appreciate Superintendent you spending time to kind of give us a high-level look of, let's look out over the next 6 to 12 months on issues that we're going to need to discuss and the ones that we're going to ask for input. That being said, I'll certainly welcome any other comments from board members. We have had a member of the audience that would like to make a comment. This is not really an official meeting, but certainly I'm glad to allow that as well. Before I'll do that, I'll ask any board member if they'd like to say anything.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
For example, the how. You mentioned parents should choose the schools and the courses that will best suit the needs of their child. How would that look in reference to allowing parents that autonomy for their child's education? What is the department looking? How would that be structured?
Well, I think we've tried to provide as many options for parents as possible, both at the school level by creating schools of choice, schools within districts through our Believe and Succeed program, charter schools, as well as publicly funded private schools. We also have created course options and worked with districts to create course options, and we'll be promoting our diploma pathways in ways that try to move districts toward not just providing college preparatory work, but career preparatory work, so that every student graduates credentialed for at least college or career.
Okay. My next question, which will lead to my final, as I look at it says continue the transition, and one of the statements was made as we continue our transition to higher expectation and a level playing field, our state will follow. And I think one of the issues that I have with the policies is that even though we have these policies and they look good on paper, but the implementation process is flawed, meaning that we'll say that we're going to do this, and particularly as a board, but then when it's beginning to be implemented within these districts or within these local schools, that the implementation is not a level playing field because the policies are not consistent across the board. So I think that we need to look at that as board members and as a governing body, that we need to make sure that the policies are consistent, but not only that, that the implementation is being implemented properly as well, which leads to my final statement would be, I know you made a statement that the chairs will be part of this process. I would like to say that as one of the members, and I'm not a chair of any committee, I would like to be a part of the process in some decision makings as well.
Thank you.
Any other board member? Yes.
I just want to say that I think these are all important issues, and I appreciate the fact that we're going to, begin these dialogues. I know that, they deal with policies that have been in place for a while, and I'm certainly interested in seeing how the policies, particularly around the student promotion, have benefited the students of the state, and thinking, I just think that this is a good time to think about a lot of things that we've had in place, and I look forward to those that the information and also seeing, the decisions, how those decisions have impacted students. So there'll be a lot of tough decisions ahead, but I think it's where we need to be.
Yeah, board members, if I could just emphasize that point for a second. I think that there are structures that are currently in place, like the promotion policies, for example, like the diploma pass, for example, that certainly as Superintendent Lee could tell you, or these are very large sweeping policies that impact tens of thousands of kids on a yearly basis. We have 3 diplomas, we have strict promotion criteria, and I agree with Ms. Bofi that it just merits taking a look at them. In other words, if we're going to adjust our standards upward, let's also think about, do we have the right policies this way? And I take Ms. Hill's points as well on the implementation. So I don't think that you shouldn't hear from us that we're just thinking about how do we make things harder. I think there's also the question of, are we routing students in the right ways given the policies that exist?
I'm going to invite others can speak, but Lee Barrios had turned in a card, and again, this is just an information presentation, but certainly would welcome her comments.
Lee Barrios, retired teacher from St. Tammany Parish. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to say something. You know that it's my belief that this is a public forum, and that people, educators, parents, all stakeholders should have a great opportunity in giving input, and that's why I'm here. Just to speak generally about the concept as opposed to the specifics, which I know you're not there yet. I have to totally agree with you in this case, Mr. Romer, which I don't often do, that the way policy has been dealt with by the Department of Ed and Bessie has not been to the advantage of all the stakeholders in the past. And I hope that this is an omen for the future, that it will be more open. I'm concerned, though,
I'd like to say it's a harbinger rather than an omen.
Harbinger.
It's just a different word.
Oh, yeah. Maybe a bad choice of words, maybe from experience not, but I am concerned, though, that at the same time, council meetings, advisory council meetings like SACS are now being deemed as no longer open meetings, according to a court ruling recently. I hope that is not an omen. Superintendent White, you said that you began with the fact that educators need to make these decisions for themselves. Parents need to make these decisions for themselves. My general question is, what role does the Department of Ed and Bessie see themselves in now? Is it more of a dictatorial policy type committee, or is it a collaborative committee that works with all the stakeholders to develop the policy? Because it appears that in the last few years this has been a dictatorial policy making body, and that all you do, the Department of Ed does, is make policy. The support organization is gone. The information organization is gone. The information isn't there. You're hiding under the FERPA regulations. Evidently now that's the latest way to withhold information from the public. So I hope that you consider that this to be a truly open procedure that you engage in, because the public has a lot to say about it. Thank you.
Sure. If I may respond, I appreciate your comments. I too agree that our advisory committees should operate as a public meeting. I mean, I've said that clearly. The law doesn't necessarily align with that feeling, but we're going to ask all of our advisory committees to operate that way. And, you know, members can overrule me in that regard if they'd like. I don't think they want to. So I agree with you on that sentiment, that we want there to be public comment and plenty of opportunity for public input. In terms of what I see or what we see, and others can, I'm one board member, I happen to be the board president. I know the discussions I've had with members. What we ultimately hope this board to do is to help establish the standards by which we hope our students to achieve and where we expect them to get, and allow districts more freedom on how to get there, but we hold them accountable for results. That's not necessarily dictatorship, but it is a sense of what is the goal, what should our students achieve. Now, the last few years have been marked by the need for significant reform in this state. I will remind you that we have 230,000 kids below grade level, and tough decisions need to be made, and sometimes tough decisions aren't always the most popular. I hate that it may come across as a dictatorial type of behavior. That's not our intent going forward, and that is part of the reason why you see today this presentation, and in fact, you will see several other presentations today that really are to prompt the discussion over the next 6 to 12 months, not just on the day we make a vote. So I appreciate your sentiment, and I hope that it's not an omen, that it's a harbinger of different behavior. So I appreciate your comments. I don't know if any other board member would like to comment or not. And Superintendent, I certainly appreciate your presentation. I think these are going to be, we'll make a lot of decisions over the next 2 years as we do raise standards on how do we do so effectively and how do we do so fairly. And I think it'll be a good conversation. Mr. Lee.
I appreciate the superintendent taking a global view of not only expectation and accountability, but how we get there. And I think this is a move in the right direction. I think the more we involve, include others, particularly stakeholders, then the better results we're going to get. So I think this is a move in the right direction, and I appreciate the presentation.
Anything else, Superintendent?
No, I don't think so. I think we will continue to Ms. Hill's point, keep all members apprised, and we'll make these decisions going forward. I would imagine that the first kind of items you'll begin to see on agendas, but we'll be talking in greater depth with committees and so on, will be in October, and that will probably move through the spring. And as you know, but we're out, say, talking publicly on diploma issues today and meeting in all your districts with stakeholders about that. Some of you have been in those meetings. I appreciate that. And so just look forward to having the decision-making go forward. So thank you.
Thank you. We will start the Educating and Effectiveness Committee scheduled for 9:30. I think we can start it in 5 minutes. So if everyone will regroup in 5 minutes, we'll call the first committee actually into session. Thank you.